Join me today driving one of my absolute dream cars on my top 10 hit list of things I'm gonna own soon, I really hope. Yes, it's a Ford Crown Victoria, at last. But this one isn't a cop car.
Proud to be sponsored by Diamond Bright, the car care products that have been keeping the furious fleet looking their best for a long time already. To find all you need to keep your car clean and protected, follow the link below to diamondbright.co.uk.
Well, here we have a Crown Victoria, Ford's indestructible, iconic police car, built on the unbreakable Panther platform. This is a Series 2 car. The Series 1 Crown Vic ran from 79 to 1991, and then the Series 2 from 1992 all the way to 2011, with various changes in between. Now, if you've watched any of my live chats and things, and people frequently ask, what's my dream car? What am I going to buy next, given the choice? Well, the answer isn't a Ferrari or an Aston Martin or some other kind of exotic supercar or sports car. It's one of these, because if you've got an unlimited budget and buyers with very deep pockets, you can make a car that goes 200 using whatever exotic materials you like and then only drive that car for 1,000 miles a year. If, however, you want to be driving a car that does 400, 500,000 miles with basic service, abused every day of its working life and driven 7 days a week around the clock and survive and then be sold on to be used as a taxi, I've got a lot of respect for that, and that's what this is. Now, although my dream car is a P71, P71 stands for Police Interceptor. Look on the VIN number here in the windscreen and you can see right in the middle exactly what designation of Ford Crown Victoria you're looking at. This one, however, is a P72. And normally that means heavy duty chassis, fleet sales, so destined for something like a taxi cab. That also means something else which is not so well known, and that's what this is, a GCC or Gulf Cooperation Council car, built for export to Kuwait or to Saudi Arabia. And so there are various differences between the US spec heavy duty car, which is destined for fleet use, and the GCC heavy duty car, which was destined for private sales and so had to be a bit more plush inside. It's an interesting comparison between this as a civilian luxury car and the more utilitarian fleet cars we're used to. Right, so here we are at the front of the GCC spec P72 Crown Victoria. Now, it's a weird amalgam of parts from different cars across the ranges. This grille, this chrome grille, is normally fitted to P71s in SAP or civilian appearance pack, because a Crown Vic with a chrome grille is definitely not a police car, or on actual civilian ones. I love seeing a Spitfire, but they're so loud. Around the side, looking at this wheel, you'll notice this now has a 16-inch steel wheel with the dog dish hubcaps, as you would find on a typical patrol car or a lot of detective pack cars as well. This car, however, because it was a civilian sort of luxury car, did have alloy wheels when it was shipped out to the Middle East. The Series 2 cars kept the vented disc brakes as before from the Series 1 cars, but of course they were bigger discs now, so they needed the 16-inch wheels to be added. And then in 2006 they went to a full 17-inch rim. Now, under the bonnet, all Crown Victoria's got a 4.6 litre single overhead cam modular V8 engine, the same engine as is found in Mustangs famously. Now, lots of changes over the years, and obviously different power outputs, and also every year had 2 different power outputs depending on single or dual exhaust, so civilian or police spec. Starting in 2000, this thing made 200 horsepower with single exhaust or 215 with dual exhaust. In 2001, it gained the Mustang GT heads, which meant the power leapt to 220 or 235 horsepower. Then in 2003, a new NOx sensor was fitted, which meant they could creep the power up to 224 or 239. And finally in 2004, the metal air intake from the Mercury Marauder was fitted, which meant it rose to its pinnacle power of 250 horsepower. The only other significant change through its life was in 2005 when it went to drive-by-wire. So cars pre-2003 are fully analogue. Then between 2003 and 2005 there's a weird hybrid of analogue and digital, and finally from 2005 onwards it's a fully digital management and dashboard. A significant difference for people looking at police interceptors is the engine upgrades, because there's so much extra cooling, because there's the anticipation that these cars will be idling by the roadside for a long time, waiting for potential perpetrators to come blasting past, so then it'd be straight from idle to full revs in an instant, and doing that repeatedly for long periods. So we've got uprated cooling, we've got transmission cooling, we've got an oil cooler. There's coolers for every fluid you can think of, and the car is designed to run hot for long periods and not overheat and not damage itself, which is ideal for a car headed out to the hot states of the Middle East. So although the P72 chassis code cars destined for fleet use in the US didn't get all of the heavy-duty running updates, the P72s, which were GCC cars, did. So this is effectively a P71 engine and cooling system. However, underneath the car, the P72s headed to be taxis and so forth in the US did get the fully strengthened heavy-duty chassis, which the P72 for the Golf also did. Are you with me? Now, I'm sure many of you will be experts on Crown Vics already watching this, and you might have noticed this little protector plate, which is wrong for a 2002 car because this arrived in 2003. This little guard here protects the serpentine belt from presumably damaging the air conditioning or going into the fan should it snap. The owner of the car has added this as an option. Cars prior to 2002 had a much bigger fan shroud which kind of did the same job. Now, you may notice there's no bonnet lining under here. Most cars generally have some kind of padded sound deadening. This has got none of that because obviously they're built for fleet, police, that kind of thing. They didn't get that. So if you're buying a car that's been a hot state police car, you'll often find that the paint is peeling or cracked from having sat over a hot engine for so many hours. I'm surprised though that they didn't put sound deadening and insulation on a car destined for a luxury market. Now, on US market cars, you'll find the civilian versions came with a little keypad to open the door and open the boot. On cop cars, the P71s, you didn't. You just had a little key. Later on, you got a key fob, which could actually open the car. However, this is a civilian GCC car, so it doesn't come with a keypad. It's surprisingly tight access into such a big car. But the seats are lovely and squishy. Now, unlike your patrolman working somewhere in the States, you've not got a basic seat, you've got a 6-way electric seat, which a year after this car went to an 8-way electric seat. The passenger on the right hand side, obviously because it's a left-hand drive car, has a 4-way manual, although you could option an electric seat on the thing as well. Now, there are a couple of changes between police and civilian spec cars. Notably, first of all, is the upholstery. Civilians get nice upholstery. Police tended to get vinyl that was wiped clean for obvious reasons, unless it was a detective pack car or a civilian appearance car when they got velour in the States as well. However, for the GCC export cars, you got 40-20-40 split bench seats, so technically it's kind of a 6-seater in here. Let's have a little look around the interior. There's lots of headroom, there's lots of elbow room. Because it's claimed to be a 6-seater, although looking at this massive transmission tunnel, you would basically want your middle seat person to be a toddler or an amputee. And the belt line of the car is quite high, so you're sitting fairly low in the vehicle. Let's start over on the door, as we always do. First of all, hard-wearing, rubbery vinyl elephant hide. They are pretty much always this grey colour. Sometimes there's a kind of a denim-y blue or a sand colour later on and black towards the end, but mostly they're this kind of grey colour. In the door card, we've got a nice solid door pull, and ahead of that, a speaker. There's 4 speakers in the car. The cop cars did get speakers as well. I think the radio, though, was optional. Then we have this nice bank of switches and buttons, all typically massive buttons. American cars always have oversized plastic buttons for some reason. Starting at the front, we've got a little rocker joystick for the electric mirrors. Then we've got door unlock and lock, U and L for unlock and lock. Then we have 4 electric windows. 1 touch on the driver's window, manual all the way touch on the other 3. And of course a window lockout, which is a big old bar. It looks like a bit of a Cadbury's finger stuck into the door. It's such a big chunky plastic thing. Now below that, the bottom half of the door is actually carpeted for a bit of luxury going on there, and there's an okay sized door pocket for putting stuff and nonsense into. And then we have one of the changes from the police to the civilian spec. Civilian spec cars always have the trunk release here on the door. On a cop car, it's right here in the centre of the dashboard, so both occupants can access it because they've got police equipment in the boot, so the passenger may want to be using that in a police car. In the civilian car, only the driver has that option. And behind that, we've got another little button, which is your fuel cap. That's open now. Let's try and remember to shut that before we drive off. The dashboard is very big and very wide. It's kind of swoopy and the restrained curves. They've not gone for all-out excitement. The Chevy Caprice of the similar period was criticised for being just a bit too out there, so Ford reined in their design and kept it fairly simple and basic. In fact, it does kind of hark back to 70s cars in a way. Of course, the Panther platform goes back to 79. It is basically a 70s car underneath. So that you've got this very vertical kind of slab of dashboard in front of you. In this corner here past the driver, you've got the switch area for the lights. A lamp auto to off to parking to dip and push for the interior light. Yeah. Which is on already because the door's open. And above that we've got a little rocker cover. This is quite an unusual arrangement. The panel dim rocker And at night you can actually knock this all the way down so all the lights go off, a bit like the Saab night mode, except unlike the Saab, the speedo goes black as well, so you can be driving in total darkness, have no clue how fast you're driving. Now let's look at the dials. The dials are a big deal on these because they kind of identify what car you've got. If it's a P71 cop car, you'll have calibrated speedometer, or calibrated written in the middle of the speedo. As a civilian car, it hasn't got that. Also notably, this is a Middle East export car, so the numbers are actually in kilometers per hour, not miles per hour. With a little minor MPH sub-dial. From 2006 onwards, they changed the speedo, so it was a digital sensor, so the odometer readout was a digital rather than mechanical readout, and at the same time it gained an idle hour counter as well, so fleet managers would know how long the car had been sitting idling beside the road. They worked out approximately 33 hours of idle time was equivalent to 1 mile driven, so they could calculate how often it needed oil changes without having driven particularly far. On this one, the analog speedo, we've also got the park reverse neutral drive 2-1, the Prundle gauge below the speedo, and we've got a column mounted gear shifter just there. To the left there's a voltmeter and a fuel gauge on the left hand pod, interestingly high to low rather than numbers on it, so charging high or charging low, pretty basic stuff, and an arrow to the fuel door. Over on the right hand side of the speedo dial, engine temperature and oil. Now this gear shift is a 4-speed automatic with a manual overdrive button on the end. This car, being a 2002, will be fitted with the 4R70W transmission. From 2004 onwards, it got the 4R70E, which is an electronic overdrive. Police cars though got the 4R75W, which is a 4-speed with manual overdrive. And if you see a police interceptor from later years, they've still got a label on the dashboard saying engage overdrive when in pursuit. Also on the steering column, we've got a little hazard light switch, a tiny little button. This is the smallest button on the dashboard, I think. On the left hand side, we've got our indicator switch and the wiper on the same stalk, along with the washers. Now we've got the wheel. This is a typical standard Ford parts bin item which you will find on everything from an Econoliner to a town car virtually, don't quote me on that. This one though is a kind of a rubbery plastic material, because a lot of the materials in the GCC cars were rubbery and plastic rather than leather because of the temperatures in the car. It's a multi-function wheel, so we've got our cruise control buttons. It's an airbag wheel because, you know, post noughties. That airbag also doubles up as a button for the horn. That's less impressive than I thought it would be. Oh, that's a micro horn. What are you thinking, Ford? Finally, on the control column, we've got our rake adjustment lever. Whee, that pops up very fast. Pull the little lever towards you, and you can adjust the rake to find your perfect driving position. Now, of course, it's a 2-pedal car, it's an automatic, so accelerate and brake down by your feet. And the 3rd pedal is, of course, the foot parking brake with a little tag to pull to release it, like on a Mercedes in Europe. Now, continuing down our big wide dashboard. First of all, we've got a pair of big air vents. There's very powerful air conditioning in this car. And then we've got the double-din radio. This thing is huge, but so basic. It's a FM radio cassette with 6 huge chunky buttons for choosing your stations, but quite little buttons for choosing your bass and treble and that kind of stuff. That's the thing with American cars, they always have such basic looking radios unless you have a big upgrade. Now, police cars never got wood. This one does have a nice little timber insert running from the full width of the dashboard with Crown Victoria just set into it over in front of the passenger. Now here in the centre is where we would have had the police bonnet boot release or trunk release, and underneath that we've got our heated rear screen button, which looks like a bit of an afterthought the way it's tacked in just there. And to its right we have got our ventilation controls, fan speed, temperature, and then the air conditioning, normal AC and max AC, which had this landed in its destination would have been set to that pretty much all the time. One other thing here on the steering column, which I did notice and forgot to mention, is the ignition barrel. It's got a large plastic shroud on it, so it looks like you can have some exciting, clever, fun key with lots of functions, but no, you have the most basic 1984 Transit key you've ever seen. It just slots in there and the whole thing turns in a big chunky switch manner. So yeah, bit of a letdown there. Now underneath your ventilation controls we've got what looks like a massive ashtray, and it is, well, both an ashtray, your lighter socket and your cup holders. Let's try the T-shelf ability of this car. Ah, American car binging. Oh, American cars, why must you bing? Now, these cup holders are quite large and only about 3 centimeters deep, so there's a little bit of wobble in there, but surprisingly secure. I think I could probably drive with this cup and it would take some pretty hard cornering to lose that mug out of there, so not too bad. The owner's phone holder does stop the left hand one being used with a cup this size though. In terms of T-shelf, You can't put anything tall on there. It's okay for, you open your box of fries, your burger box, we'll open them, sit on there quite happily. It's quite a long way away though, so it's okay-ish. You can set things down and sit back. If maybe you're going to a drive-in movie, you can relax on there, but then obviously you want to see out the windscreen. This, on a police car, depending on the model of course, would potentially be a plastic desk type thing for writing tickets and so forth, and could be used. However, this is a civilian spec, so it's not, it's comfy. So we don't have that. We do have an armrest though. Now over on the right hand side, which is the passenger area of the car, lots of foot space, a big airbag panel here, and a large glove box which is full of stuff obviously, and has a label somewhere in there which says something about GCC speed warning, but doesn't tell us what the speed warning is. Right, let's look in the back of the car. God, it's windy today. Right. Considering it's such a big car, it's actually not that massive in the back. If you've ever been in like a New York taxi and sat behind that Perspex screen which comes behind here, you'd be surprised how claustrophobic the back of a Crown Vic actually is in taxi form. Now, there's various options in rear seat. If this was a police car in sort of basic squad car black and white format, this seat would be moulded plastic basically, with actual cutouts behind the passenger area so that someone in handcuffs can sit with their hands behind them. This went up to a basic padded bench seat, up to this rather nice velour for the export. There's not much in the way of options back here. We've got a door pull, a door handle, a little ashtray, electric window switch, and I'm going to say speaker, and a speaker in the parcel shelf, along with some anchor points for a child seat, which of course a police car wouldn't have got. One thing we do get though are these air vents in the back of the front armrest. This is only available in the GCC cars and long wheelbase taxis after a certain date, and the Lincoln Town cars. This is quite a specific option to this vehicle. And of course the velour fabric, because of hot country, leather was an option but wasn't often picked because it was very hot to sit on in a very hot place. Headroom though is incredible. The four-door roof goes way back past and into this actually quite a narrow rear windscreen. It's quite a shallow depth from top to bottom. You think it's a great big bit of glass, but you look through it's actually a little bit of a letterbox. But even so, it goes far enough behind your head that you have got quite nice headroom, so it's without the taxi safety screen, it's not too bad. Lots of room for my feet, my knees aren't too compressed. We have got an armrest, so we can luxuriate in style. There's no cup holders and no access into the boot. One of the things of making the Crown Vic into a police car is accident survivability. So like on a Rover P6 from the 60s and 70s, where it was made as a real sort of safety point, the fuel tank is mounted between the rear wheels and partially behind the back seat, so a folding back seat isn't an option. Now, around the back of the cars, there's lots of differences yet again. This piano black finish is only on detective pack or export cars. The words Crown Victoria only appear on civilian cars or detective pack or export. Police Interceptors didn't get it because otherwise you might realise it's a police interceptor, although it was given away by the words police interceptor, or alternatively K9 Interceptor if it's a dog car. This was never a dog car but did gain the badge in 2011, I believe. Now, to actually get into the trunk, because it is a typical 3-box traditional saloon, you either use the button on the door or this key in the lid. Inside, it's a huge space. It's 585 litres. Can you hear the echo? However, it's a really strange shape because you've got a big dipped area here in the centre, raised areas at the side, and there's big shelf thing above the fuel tank where the spare tyre sits. So actually using it as a trunk isn't always the best. However, it does come with nice little lights, and you've got a couple of extra little things. On the left-hand side, there's a pull tag for emergency opening the fuel tank if your button has broken on the door. And also, mandated by law, all American cars do have this emergency get out of the trunk pack. So if you do have a victim nestling in your boot area, make sure you've tied their hands first, otherwise they will escape. Even though this is potentially a luxury car in the market it was being sold for, there's no trunk lining either, like on the bonnet, and so there's no nice friendly grab handles, just a sharp-edged sheet metal. You have to put your hand outside in the dirt to close the boot. Right, so I am about to set off in what is quite an exciting drive, because I've wanted a Crown Vic for years, but I've never driven one. That's chiming at me. Don't chime at me. Right, so we'll set the AC to normal AC. Norm! Right, release the handbrake. It'll, God, that's violent. And then down into drive. And we are away. Well, visibility is quite nice. We'll get this out on the dual carriageway and see how it goes on a faster road than this. I think 235 horsepower is wasted on an industrial estate. Right, let's see what it's like. It's an automatic, an old school automatic torque converter, but with a big old torquey V8 engine, and it's a fast roundabout. A little delay and then it goes. Oh, this is quite nice, isn't it? Oh, floating along the road. It's a heavy car. First fast braking and I can feel the weight of the car. It's about 1,800 and something kilos, 4,020 pounds in old money, and you can feel every single one of them as you come to a halt after getting above 40 miles an hour. Yeah, this car does not have ABS, which is actually something I find incredible. I didn't mention it previously because I'd assumed it would be standard, but no, export cars didn't get it until 2003. Cop cars didn't get it as an option until 2006. You have to remember, looking at the speedo, we're not doing 80 miles an hour, we're doing 50 kilometers an hour, because the big numbers are kph. Gosh, it's very wandery. Sitting here on a smooth dual carriageway and the car is still moving a fair amount, way more than I thought it would. But there's still power. You still just brush the throttle and the car just drifts a little bit further forward. Considering it's a fast pursuit car, like in California Highway Patrol, they were just nailing these things everywhere. It's a very nice, relaxing thing to roll around in. Now, I'm told that if you turn the air conditioning off and just go into basic blowing vents, it kind of gains a chunk more power. So I turned it off. Oh yeah, the gear shift isn't hunting anymore. That's very interesting. You would not think a 4.6 litre V8 would struggle with any or have any kind of issue with the AC being turned on. Now, of course, the Crown Victorian name goes back to the 1950s when it ran for a couple of generations of a very different car indeed. Well, I say very different car indeed because that too was a body-on-frame traditional three-box saloon. And when this car ended, this was the very last sedan built in America, in the world, as a solid V8 rear-wheel drive three-box saloon with a proper old-fashioned chassis. And 0 to 60 is a claimed 7-point-something seconds, but most people generally feel it's nearer to 8-point-something seconds in reality. That strange driving a left-hand drive car again. Get used to it pretty quickly, but it's been a while. Now, you may be wondering why an American company like Ford is chucking out their police cars as luxury vehicles in the Middle East. Well, it was realised that that particular area had a strong market for large four-door, three-box sedans. They sold well over there, but people wanted something with like a more simplicity than a European luxury car like a Audi or a BMW. They liked the idea of the basicness of a big Ford, and so they sent them over as, in 5 different trim levels, a luxury three-box sedan, with obviously all the changes we've spoken about already. All of these cars were built in Ontario, the St Thomas's plant in Canada. Apparently this is so that Ford could get away with avoiding their gas guzzler tax in America and keep on building a V8. So every single one of the Crown Vics, regardless of the spec, came from that same factory. And interestingly, the very last car to come off the line when they shut down the St Thomas factory in 2012 was a Golf spec Crown Vic. Not this one, obviously. That was 10 years afterwards.
This car was actually destined for Saudi Arabia in 2002, but then Gulf War II broke out, and so the order was cancelled and it wound up being bought by a British car importer.
God, this thing is so smooth on the highway, it just drifts along. The owner said it was boaty, and he was not wrong. I don't like saying American cars are boaty. It feels like I'm sort of pandering to a preconception. But You are. Unfortunately, you are wafting along, rolling through the corners quite horrifically. Now, these were never sold in the UK, so they haven't got quite the same kind of cultural attachment as in America. But same as when a Rover SD1, a Vauxhall Senator, or a Volvo T5 rolls up in your mirror in the UK. If you see those unique square lights with the central indicators glowing on the daytime running lights in America, you know there's a cop following you. Because by 2006, 95% of sales were to fleets. The civilian market was virtually non-existent. So even the civilian appearance package SAP cars were fooling no one, let's face it. So yeah, even though we don't have these cars in the UK, we kind of feel familiar with them because we've seen them in so many TV shows, movies. They are the background of America. They are part of the roadscape and the landscape of the States and our sort of filmography. They are shorthand for America in many ways. So it's kind of a shame they've now been stopped production and all been retired. California Highway Patrol actually retired their last CVPs just a couple of weeks ago. But the police forces loved them because they were just so tough, so indestructible. They could just drive them and drive them and drive them and they wouldn't break. There's lots of regular servicing and oil changes and they went on and on. Good air conditioning and a comfy chair. If you're in the car for 8 hours a day, that's what you need. Now, part of the spec for a P71 police interceptor, or a police interceptor in general, is the ability to be rear-ended at 70 miles an hour and survive the crash and potentially be drivable still as well. And this solid chassis does give you that survivability. It also means that in a front and rear impact, it's great for survivability as well. And the police car's got an enhanced, strengthened rollover B posts and A posts, so the car will roll over better as well. But even then, it's not such a great thing to do in one of these. It's a bit of a fragile thing if you go sideways into it or roll it over. So best not to do that. Another option police cars got, which civilian cars didn't, were ballistic doors. This panel here, or behind this panel here, you could have a sheet of Kevlar with a small hole in it so a police officer could shelter behind his car door and shoot through the outer skin. Let's get over here. Police cars also got stab-proof seat backs. So if you had someone arrested in the back of the seat, they couldn't shank you when you're driving the car. Obviously, civilian cars and taxis didn't get that. Although probably taxi drivers needed it more than the police officers thinking about it. Now, people who are looking for a P71 or a Crown Vic to drive as an everyday car, they really value this kind of ridiculous police spec stuff that they would never need in daily life. But if you're buying a Crown Vic, it's the kind of stuff you really want. I'd say that speaking as someone who really wants a Crown Vic with all that stuff that I don't need. I must say this does feel big on a back lane in England. I know it is a big car. Apparently it's 212 inches long, which means nothing to me because it's old-fashioned measurements. But that's big, and it's bigger, in fact longer, than a current generation 7 Series or S-Class. So yeah, this is a big car. Driving down a little tiny country lane, left-hand drive, it does feel like a large car. But you don't get into one of these cars not expecting it to be big. You know it's going to be a big car when you buy it. Being an automatic transmission, it's very easy to drive. I could flick on the overdrive now as we're cruising steadily, drop the revs a little bit, save some fuel. I can't tell you what revs we're doing because, interestingly, there is no rev counter in this car. One little side effect of the on the end of the transmission stalk overdrive switch is that I'm kind of used to cars where you select drive on an automatic by pushing the end of it. So every time I get in the car and turn it on, I keep pushing the overdrive button, so I'm starting it in overdrive by mistake. I'm sure I get used to it in no time though. That is an unmistakable sound. I'm not even hoofing it particularly hard, but even just under sort of moderate acceleration, this is such an iconic noise as well. Obviously it's a V8 engine, of course it is, but that noise you've heard in 1,000 films and 1,000 cop shows, you know what a Crown Vic sounds like even before you turn the engine on. Objectively, It's not as good as the Taurus, which has replaced it, but the Taurus could never really capture people's hearts the way this thing has done. If you've seen the regular car reviews review of a Crown Vic, he's got this little mantra going in the background: you want to be a cop, you want to be a cop, you want to be a cop. Well, it's not really that. It's a car is just such a part of history, a part of culture. It's a pop culture icon. Wanting a Crown Vic is just, I don't know, wanting to wear Levi's jeans or a denim jacket or something. It leans a lot. It doesn't slide easily though. You can imagine if they're doing a TV show and getting the Crown Vics going sideways, they're having to provoke them a bit. They did rework the suspension quite heavily in 2003, and the cars became a fair bit more stable then. Now I've done a few more miles in this thing. It doesn't feel quite so twitchy on the steering. The power steering is still just astonishingly light. So I'm used to cars with just a slightly heavier steering input, so you feel like you're twitching quite a lot. Now I'm more used to it, it just kind of feels a bit more normal. The accelerator is fairly soft. This is still a cable operated accelerator on this car. There's nothing behind us, so I'm going to hit the brakes quite hard just to see what happens. Not masses. Apparently it's about 145 foot stopping distance from 60, I think I read this morning. I'm not sure how that compares with the Mondeo. Now weirdly, the overdrive is automatically engaged, so you have to push the button to disengage overdrive before you set off if you want to drive quickly. Now we are beside a dual carriageway, so let's see what it's like 0 to 60 with the overdrive turned off. Okay, off we go, 3, 2, 1. And 60. This is pursuit mode. And 70. And at the bottom of the accelerator travel, there is another detent which you can push even harder, which is like a kick down point. Push it just a little bit more. Now we're cruising. We can turn the overdrive off again. It's weird having an overdrive. It's like being in the 1940s or 50s. Now I was considering buying one of these for semi-daily use a little while ago, but I was worried about the fuel economy. Apparently on a long run, if you're driving steadily, not being silly and accelerating like an idiot all the time, you can get around 30 mpg. However, when you get into town, you do start dropping to, well, nearer 15 for just around town shuffling, which isn't quite as good. Would that put me off owning one? No, because it wouldn't be my everyday car, so I'd still be happy to have one. Well, thank you for joining me today in this fantastic Golf spec luxury Crown Vic. This has been a huge experience, my first time behind the wheel of one of my dream cars. It's weird that I've driven so many things and not driven one of the cars that I want to own so much. So thanks so much to the owner, Ben, for letting me drive it today. It's been lots of fun. If you enjoyed this, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and I'll see you again next time driving something completely different.